Sometimes a fully rigged out camera is absolute overkill for the job. But on the other hand, going with just a bare bones camera body doesn't cut it either. That's why I built out this minimalistic camera rig that is perfect for run and gun shooting and travel filmmaking. So let's break this thing down right now. I'm not showing up to every job with a full-on matte box, V-mount battery, wireless transmitter, follow focus, and all that kind of stuff, because honestly, it may not be necessary for the job at all. Sometimes all you need is just a camera body and a good lens. So now that you understand a little bit more of the reason behind this build, let's break it down and build it back together piece by piece. So here is the bare bones Sony FX3 camera body. And this has been my absolute all-time favorite full frame mirrorless camera that I have ever owned and used. And I have no plans to switch away from it anytime soon. Now, you don't need this camera to rig out something similar. You could do this with the Sony a7S III, Panasonic, Blackmagic cameras, Canon, whatever it is, these principles will apply to all of them. The first thing we're gonna put on it is this small rig half camera cage. And I think it's worth mentioning that this video is not sponsored by Small Rig or any of the other parts that I'm using today. It's actually sponsored by Skillshare, and more on that later. The main reason I use a half cage on the Sony FX3 instead of a full cage is because I still wanna be able to access the hot shoe on here so that if I do wanna use the XLR audio top handle, I can mount that on really easily and I don't have to take off the entire cage. The next thing we're gonna add is this little piece of NATO rail that actually comes with the half cage. And yes, it does cover the hot shoe, which I was just talking about, but it's really easy to take on and off because it's only 2 1/4-20 threads. The next thing we need is a lens, and what I'm using today is the Sony 16-35 G Master lens. Now, the reason that I'm using an autofocus lens is because when I'm out run and gun and travel filmmaking, I want to be able to just point and shoot and have things tack sharp and focus really quickly. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm always running autofocus lenses in those situations. It just depends on the look that I want to get. So a lot of times I am running manual focus lenses and just pulling manually, but for today's rig, we're going with a nice autofocus lens. The next thing we're gonna add is a top handle. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you know that I'm always rocking a top handle. So this one is from Tilta and it's really small and compact and it actually mounts with NATO rail. So it's really easy to take on and off with no tools, which is really necessary when you're trying to move quickly. So when I saw it come out, I knew I had to buy it. I think it was only about $40 US. Let's take a minute to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. Now, I've been really wanting to master Unreal Engine this year because I've been dabbling with it some, but there are just too many sources out there, and honestly, I didn't know where to begin. So I wanted to check out Skillshare to see if they had any good classes on it, and of course they did. I've been watching Unreal Engine 5 for beginners from Jordy Vandeput, and it has been so helpful. I've already learned a lot of really useful shortcuts and tricks. I'm definitely gonna take more classes about it on Skillshare, and there are thousands of other online classes you can take on videography, photography, business, and so much more. Make 2023 the year you perfect a new creative hobby, learn a new software, or launch your business. Try out a risk-free 30-day trial to check it out for yourself. The first 1,000 people to use the link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. The next thing we're gonna get on here is an external monitor, because for me, having an external monitor is an absolute bare minimum. I've got to be able to see if things are in focus and exposed properly. I know a lot of people like to run off of just the LCD on the back, and I think in a pinch you can do that, but I've found that the actual look of my images get so much better when I have at least a 5-inch monitor. And the one that I'm using today is the Atomos Ninja 5. And you don't have to use this monitor. You can really use any monitor that works for you. The reason that I like using this is because it has an external recorder that allows me to record in ProRes RAW, which is really awesome because I can get some great images out of the Sony FX3 in ProRes RAW. But again, not necessary. You can really use any monitor. I don't recommend going above a 5-inch when you're trying to be compact and small. You know, a 7-inch just gets too big and heavy. Now, 2 other options for monitors that are a really good price are the Atomos Shinobi or the Small HD Action 5. Now, in order to mount this monitor, I always use this little small rig monitor mount. And I have sung about this on the channel so many times. It's my absolute favorite. So it has area locating pins so it won't spin on you, and it actually mounts right in the front of the top handle here, which is my favorite spot to put it. I've made a bunch of videos about it. I've released some little shorts and TikToks and gotten a lot of hate because people did not like me saying that this is how you should mount your monitor instead of with a magic arm. But you know, to each their own. The magic arm has its place on shoots, but this is just my favorite way to do it. All right, now let's mount the monitor on top here. And there we go. That is really nice and compact. It makes it really easy to see your screen and have it nice and centered behind the rig, especially if you're holding it from the top handle. You can see everything you need to see right here, and it's just, man, it's my absolute favorite way to shoot, is just holding this top handle and looking at the monitor. And I can pull focus with my hand right here underneath, resting if I'm on a manual focus lens, or just rest my hand here if it's using autofocus. So I absolutely love that setup. One of the final pieces that we're adding to this minimalistic camera rig is actually a matte box. Now, hang with me, this might look like total overkill, but I promise you it's not. This is the Polar Pro Base Camp, which uses a variable ND filter, which is my absolute favorite. And you've got to have it because with the Sony FX3, you don't have any internal ND filters built in. Now, we're not going to use the entire matte box today. It's actually modular, which I love because you can remove this front matte box portion, and then you just have the filters themselves. And this is actually a 2-stage filter system, so you could actually put 2 of them in here. So if you want to stack it up with mist filters or another ND filter, you can absolutely do that. But if you don't want to use something like this, you can absolutely use something much more simple and compact, like a screw-on variable ND filter. This one is from Tiffin. They of course also have the Polar Pro Peter McKinnon V&D series, which is probably the most popular. But the main reason I'm not screwing this onto the front today is because the filter threads are actually just too small for this lens. So when I'm rocking a different lens, a lot of times I will screw this on the front, and you could see just how compact and small this would be if this would actually screw onto the front, but it doesn't. So I actually have a clamp mount here on the front so that I can get this thing mounted. All right, there we go. So this rig is actually completely done now, and I just love how it feels. It's a really good weight. It's not too front heavy or back heavy, and it's compact enough, but it has all the accessories that I really find necessary on shoots. I think it's worth mentioning that I haven't added a microphone to this setup, and honestly, I haven't used this shotgun microphone in years. And the main reason is because when I'm doing shoots with a rig like this, I don't need to capture any audio because it's usually just B-roll. If I do need to capture audio, I'm definitely not using a shotgun microphone because that's just not going to sound good. I'll put a lavalier on here and then put a lavalier on my talent, whoever it is that I'm filming. Or I'll use a boom microphone and then sync the audio later on in post-production. Honestly, I find an on-camera shotgun microphone to be completely useless because I'm adding all of my sound effects later on in post-production from a library of sound effects or recording new sound effects. The only place where I could really see this coming in handy is if you were doing vlogging, then you might want something like this. But if I'm vlogging, I'm not using a camera rig like this at all. Probably be just the lens and a shotgun microphone. For some people, even this rig might be overkill, but for me, I have gone on really long hikes. I've walked all over New York City, San Francisco, and tons of other cities with a camera rig just like this, and it has not been a problem for me at all. And when I need to break it down and throw it into my backpack, I can quickly do that. There are a couple other things that are absolute essentials for me when shooting with my minimalistic camera rig, and the first one is more SD cards. You never want to run out of space on your shoots. The next thing are, of course, a few more internal batteries because, as you know, the internal batteries on pretty much any camera just don't last long enough. Then you've got to have your cleaning essentials. So I always have a microfiber cloth with me, usually in my back pocket, and then I have a couple lens wipes in case there's something on there that I just really got to get off. And of course, my trusty rocket blower I've always got with me because you don't want to ruin a shoot. I've done it before with particles and dust on your sensor that you didn't notice. I've left links to all the parts in this camera rig build down below, so if you're interested, check out the description. And don't forget to check out Skillshare. Remember, the first 1,000 1,000 people to use my link get their first month free. All right, I'll see you in the next video.